Hi, we're Ocean Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Ross, welcome to the Shoot Room Sessions on Tour.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell people out there who you are and what you do?
Who am I? I'm Ross Fairley, so I'm a lawyer, partner here at Burges Salmon, the law firm, and I head up our renewable energy team. I've been doing that for about 20 odd years, over 20 years now.
Amazing. So we went a slightly different way in prepping for the questions for your podcast today. So about 2 years ago when we first started working with the firm, amazing panel we worked with, Ross Simpson, asked me to come in and do a keynote on environment during Environment Week. And you had a group of trainees in the room that were in their sort of sandwich placement in the summer before they sort of applied for training contracts and things. And this amazingly talented young lady came up at the end and started asking me a load of really great questions. And since that point, she stayed in contact. She's now starting with you properly in September, having gone all the way through. And she came and joined us on podcast this morning. So shout out to Emily. She wrote your questions. So someone you introduced me to as a firm, it's working all the way back through. So I love the circularity.
So I know who to blame.
You do, yeah. Sorry, Emily. Yeah. So my first question, and this is one she has taken from us, can you tell us the Ross story? How did you go from childhood, where you grew up, to those key chapters that got you to where you are today?
Wow. Well, I suppose, look, let's not start right at the beginning. Let's start at how did I become a lawyer and get into this area of renewable energy and environmental law. And I went to university and I didn't have a clue what I should do. And so eventually just settled on law, had no intention whatsoever of being a lawyer, but I just thought it kept enough options open.
Whereabouts did you go to uni?
I went to Leicester University, great place. And so I did that. And unbeknown to me, actually, Leicester University, big shout out for them, because back in the day, and I won't tell you exactly when, but it was probably the first university that in their law modules established an environmental and planning law module.
Nice.
And so in the second year, you got to pick your models, as most people do in degrees of one sort or another. And I chose to do that, partly because, again, I didn't really want to be a lawyer. I'd actually thought I might want to be an architect or something to do with the landscape, something like that. I was quite interested in that, always have been. So that sparked my interest, and had a great professor, David Hughes, who's wrote one of the first books on environmental law, and he taught us. And I got really into it, and I thought, right, this is what I want to do. And it showed me that you can do law and have an interesting area and subject, as opposed to some of the more turgid ones that loads of my colleagues do. No, and I was fascinated by environmental law. And so then cut a long story short, the next thing was, as a lawyer, in those days, you push through university and then you think, right, I've got to go and complete my training in a law firm. So I did the usual thing, applied to law firms, went to a law firm in London, a big law firm, and they were one of the first firms to establish an environmental law team. So it was all coincidental and really lucky from my perspective that I done this course. I was really interested in it. I was completing my legal qualification, and they'd set up this team. So I asked to work in that area, got into that area, and then a story I tell trainees who are applying for training contracts at Burges Salmon and working here. I was pretty arrogant in those days. Some would probably say I'm still am arrogant, but I was a trainee in this massive law firm, and at the end of the period, in a period of recession, what was I thinking? When we were all deciding whether you get kept on or not. I just turned around and said, well, I'm not staying unless I do environmental law, because nothing else really interests me. And I look back on that now and think, what on earth were you doing? Because that would have been mad, actually, not to have stayed on and got some experience. But they said, okay, yeah, we want you to stay on and do environmental law. So that's how I did it. And then that morphed into a few...
Isn't the learning there to be brave and follow the thing you...
Yeah, maybe that was a bit too brave. I don't know. I think these days it's very difficult, and I think there's such competition for places that I think I would probably be a bit more reticent. But I suppose what I would say to people is in my area of law, working in a big law firm, Burges Salmon law firm, London law firms, whatever, it's hard, right? I mean, it's hard work, it's long hours, it is challenging. It's great if you love that life, but it is hard. So don't go and do an area of law that doesn't interest you, because life's too short, right? And it's really not worth it. I know everyone says, "Oh, great, lawyers are paid." It's not worth doing unless you enjoy what you do. And I've been really, really lucky in that I've got up every morning, and don't get me wrong, right? If I didn't have to work, I wouldn't do it. But of all the other things, this is the best job that I could have, and I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed doing renewable energy as well. So
I recognise and hear the honesty around lug, but I think you also deserve some credit for following what you were genuinely passionate about. And I think, maybe discretion is the better part of valor now a little bit, but you were brave and you took a chance for what you wanted to do. And that's how you managed to build the excellent career you've had, by following your heart there. So I think you should give yourself a bit of credit for that one.
Yeah, maybe. It was probably born out of naivety, but as you say, I suppose the older you get, the more reticent you are about taking risks. And maybe I was young in those days and thought, whatever. But I was very clear in my own mind that I wasn't going to do. I needed to do something that I was interested in and enjoyed.
Have you reflected on how you knew that? Because I don't think I knew that at that age. I think my dad was a builder, my mum was a cleaner and a dinner lady, and work to me was something to just put off until you could get there, because it meant hard manual work. It never occurred to me until this chapter of my career that you could love what you did. So I think there's a real element of maturity there for you to go, no, I want to do something I'm passionate about. You ever thought why you knew that or how you did?
Well, it just sort of came to me, really. I mean, I really didn't know what, up until I did that course, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was just drifting through it, and, I'll have probably gone and got qualified as a lawyer, but again, I wasn't planning to be a lawyer at all. And then it just sparked my imagination. And it does come back, I think, to, although I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, I was always interested in landscape, buildings, countryside, things to do with nature, the environment in one way, shape or form, buildings and so forth. So it seemed to work perfectly with that. And also it was really exciting at that stage, because it was a new area of law, environmental law, and there was a real buzz around it. And the other thing that's great, even now with renewable energy and environmental law, it's a new area that is developing so quickly. So I say to the young people coming into laws, energy, renewable energy, environment, all that, there's a real chance to make your mark. There are some areas of law which have, still hark back to statutes of, centuries ago, and you're still applying the same bit. With renewable energy law, it's harking back to a law that was made last year, and it's going to revamp how things are done with green hydrogen. So you can become an expert, and you've got this ability to work through new legislation that's coming in, and there's a fantastic opportunity to actually become an expert, to look at things and to drive change.
That's exciting. So you've made that bold step of saying, look, I want to stay in environmental law. Take us back to that next step in the career. What came next?
So that just, I stayed there. I became a partner in the firm, great firm, Allen & Overy, has just merged, but was a super firm. Really enjoyed my time there. But
when you think about what was it about the culture and being there that you particularly enjoyed?
It was a very supportive firm. It was great. It was great training. I really enjoyed the people I was working with. It was a big firm.
It's so often the people that.
Yeah, of course it is. And we were a group of, in those days, it was an exciting group, because we were dealing with change regularly on law, and clients coming to us saying, "What about this?" and "What about it?" It's just really, really exciting to be in that sort of, being able to advise people and give them the benefit of your thinking on something, and then taking it on board. Really, I really enjoyed that. I think as I moved up, I became a partner there, and by the time I became a partner there, I was starting to do more and more what was in those days deemed renewable energy. So it started with things like waste to energy projects, some of which probably wouldn't be deemed strictly renewable energy now, but it was the start of something. And then did a few wind farm projects and so forth. And that got me really interested in energy generally. And energy is fascinating. Again, links to the environment, particularly on the renewable side. And then what prompted the move from A&O, there was a point where, however much we had developed a team there, I think it was always going to be perceived as a support service to the key transactional and banking side, and probably rightly so. I think, there's no sense of resentment on my part there. But what I was finding was I was advising as a bit part player on the financings and the M&A and deals and things like that. And what was really interesting me was working with developers and getting in at an earlier stage on some of these projects or initiatives, and actually thinking, okay, that's more interesting, possibly not as lucrative, but probably more interesting, seeing how something comes about from the ground upwards. And there was an element of frustration there that we, just because of the cost base in London and the fees being charged, couldn't do that. And equally, I think, and I might be doing my old firm a disservice there, but I think in those days, the bigger London firms had really still not worked out that renewable energy was going to be as big as it was. And it was kind of a sort of, we do oil and gas, we do LNG projects. If it's a big enough renewable energy project, we might do it. But this new thing of wind farms and things like that, it's a bit part, really.
I think that's often the case of the bigger institutions in whatever realm.
Yeah.
The nature of what they are and their successes, they can't be as agile or change as quickly, and that's what gives them the gravitas and the clarity of thought and the sort of singular purpose on key things they focus on. You only have to look at the civil service as like the extreme example of that. Its purpose is to make sure things don't change. It does what it's supposed to do and stay in that form. So it's not a surprise to hear you say that something that had a sort of traditional focused area would be slightly slower to adjust, whereas in a smaller firm, we as a startup, we get to pivot something in minutes because I can speak to the entire team. It's not as easy to speak to 1,000 people across a law firm, for example.
Yeah.
So what year did you make the change from the Magic Circle to here?
I moved in 2004, and I looked around and I thought, okay, what am I going to do now? Am I going to stay in London and look for a firm that does a bit more of what I'd like to do, or do I look outside? And quickly realised that actually the most likely opportunity to really capitalise on what I knew was going to lie outside of London, in one of the cities outside of London. And I ended up here at Burges Salmon, and I was looking around and met up with a friend I'd known who was at Burges Salmon, Ian Salter, who was running the environmental team down here, and he said, "Well, come and join us." And I said, "Well, you're running the environmental team, and I've come from a small environmental team which can only justify X number of people anyway. That's going to be quite difficult. Am I, jumping out of the fire into another fire?" And he said, "No. He said, we can corner the market, because you've got a reputation in this area. I've got a reputation in this area. We've got a lower cost base. We can do great things down here, and we can also appeal to the types of clients that you're looking to work for." And I must admit, I did think really long and hard about that, because that was quite a gamble, because I could have gone somewhere where I would be the only person and develop it from there and so forth. But we did it, and we never looked back.
What weighed the scales in the yes? What was the thing that made you go?
I think it was Ian's enthusiasm, and the more we worked it up, we both were looking at each other going, do you know what, we really could do this, because there's no other firm doing. We could major on this and really make it big, which for a law firm of Burges Salmon size at that particular point would make a big difference. And so we decided to go for it. We did it. The firm backed us. Great, well done. Hope we've repaid that. Pretty sure we have. But it was great, and it was really supportive moving down here. And to be honest, it was easy. I mean, it was really, really easy. I mean, we were going and seeing clients and they were persuadable almost immediately, because they knew our name, they could see what we were trying to do. Yes, we were. You know, I suddenly was a lot cheaper from a fee rate perspective than before, and you're getting the same person. So it was a pretty easy sell. And from there, we just moved on. And I think the opportunity at Burges Salmon was really to not just develop the environment team, but it was also to lead the renewable energy team and actually get some of those clients in. And we were really lucky as well, in the sense we've got still have a great group of lawyers, many now partners, who are working alongside me, in capitalising on renewable energy that came forward, and within no time at all we were getting significant amounts of work.
I'd be amiss if I didn't again point out the obvious bravery in that decision, because I think a lot of people, having achieved partner status in a London law firm, that, you know, that's iconic for people wanting to be at that point. Like, that's where people set off on a law career to get to, and you thought, no, I've got another chapter. Lots of people would have settled and gone, that's me done, I'm happy, I'll stay here a while. Yet you made the decision that you wanted that next challenge and that next step. That's got to be bravery, right?
Yeah, I mean, I credit my previous firm, Allen and Overy, with something there, because in a sense, I felt I'd been at the best firm in London. You know, others will argue, but that was my personal view at the time.
That's the best way to look at it.
It's great. So if you've done that and that chapter's coming to an end, don't go for something similar, which in your own mind might not be as good. Yeah. And so, you know, I toyed with the idea, but I think having a sort of fresh perspective and change, and going to a different type of law firm, and following that dream of trying to advise the developers as well as the investors and funders was absolutely the right decision. And it did, after a while, it obviously, you know, it made sense to me completely.
Love it. Just a quick point on the actual making the change of a lifestyle from London to moving down to the southwest. When you reflect back now, was that an easy process? What tips would you give anyone else making that change? Because it can be quite scary for people if, you know, you settled, you're in a place, and then a different style of life. What was your experience?
Yeah, it was a scary move, because at that particular point, we had young twins.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
How old?
So they'd have probably been 2. So twin girls of 2.
And did the move come as a surprise to your wife, or did? Okay, this is where we get.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what, you know. And then my wife was also pregnant with our 3rd, and
wow.
And we'd settled, and but you know, my wife and I both grew up where we were living. We were living in Surrey, commuting into London, but we both grew up there, so all our family and friends were there for all of our lives. And so, yeah, I wouldn't. It's the move to the law firm, Burges Salmon, was easy. The move away from where we were, especially at that particular time, was challenging. I don't think, you know, it was very difficult for my wife.
Yeah,
and you know, and it was huge credit to her because she obviously didn't want to do it, and I completely get that, and it was disrupting everything she knew when she had young children, moving away from her mum and various things like that. So massive credit. I think if you were to ask her now, she would never look back, and she thinks it's absolutely fantastic down here. The quality of life is brilliant. It's much better for children. So we both routinely say, you know, we love where we used to live, but we wouldn't go back. And we still have friends up there that we miss, but we still wouldn't go back. So that was after a period of time. So that was probably the biggest struggle of moving down. And I think the original question was, what advice would you give?
Make it successful.
Yeah, definitely talk it through with your partner well in advance, and probably try not to do it when your partner's pregnant and expecting the third young child. But having said that, in some ways it was convenient because the children weren't settled in schools or anything like that, and they came.
I think the bit so we've been very fortunate to have some incredibly successful people, present company included, on the podcast, and certainly the male guests we've had who've had similar type of big career moves, they have always credited the partner as being the one that helped facilitate life happening so they could focus on the career part of it. So I, again, would be amiss if I didn't shout out my wife. Thank you, honey. Love you. Appreciate her doing the exact same thing to allow me to follow my sort of career trajectory and arc. And people, certainly young people in their careers, they see the career part of what you're doing and think that's the complicated bit. It's not. It's making life work and things in the background and making sure everyone's happy and healthy alongside that. So, and the other bit from your story is I think you can always find a way if you can work together with it and talk it through. And even if the timing's not ideal, it's rare the timing is ideal. You just articulated very challenging period, but actually these bits were positives as well. My sort of final question in this sort of chapter is, so you've been at Burges Salmon 20 years now?
Yeah.
Why have you stayed 20 years? What do you love the most about the company?
It's well, first of all, I love the job that I do, I suppose. And so, if you like the job and the area of law you're practicing in, we've developed something in this firm where this is, this is a massive sector and we're really well known for it. So it's a reputational issue. So why would you move? To start with, and secondly, Burges Salmon is a really, sorry, it sounds so sycophantic, but it is a really nice place to work. And the way I've described it in the past, which is unfair and probably is really understating it, but I'm sure it's the same with every professional practice area, but law firms have politics, right? I saw that in London, and there are big politics and various things like this. Burges Salmon has politics, but nowhere near any of the politics I've seen in most other places that I've come across or worked in. And the great thing about Burges Salmon then and now is it lets you get on with what you want to do. So you're not bothered by politicking or distractions that you might have in other firms. So I very much feel that this is a very entrepreneurial place to work. If you can spot an area, and we've got example of this with our younger lawyers. If you got to spot an area and you think it's going to be really interesting, the firm backs you, and they did. They backed myself and Ian before me when I moved down, and hugely supportive, and they're still backing us. If we think we've got an area, a different area of renewables that we think we're going to go for, there's no question that we'll have the backing of the team and a fully supportive team. So it's a very easy place to get up in the morning and come to work in.
Well, lovely way to describe it. I think the bit we've seen partnering with you guys for a couple of years now is you're real people. So all of you clearly feel comfortable to be your unique selves and bring that to work. Lots of companies talk about that, but few mean it. So everyone we work with is genuinely a different character, and they're warm and charismatic and interesting and playful, and it just makes it a pleasure to work with you. And in sort of previous chapters of my life, working with law firms hadn't been that. It had been a generic person that came and had clearly, they themselves were toning down who they were to fit into a stereotype or a cookie cutter shape. We don't get that with you. We get genuine human beings that are a pleasure to work with.
Well, it's very nice of you to say. I mean, I suppose I can't see that from the outside in, so it's nice to hear that. I think the other thing that's interesting about Burges Salmon is funnily enough, when I left London and I was telling people I was going to Burges Salmon, it was most lawyers in those days and the London law firms would not know any law firm outside of London. They and we were all living in our bubbles of, international law firms and London law firms. And I mentioned Burges Salmon, and the amount of people and partners at my firm and elsewhere that went, oh yeah, they're a good firm. And that was a firm that was, at that time, was based in Bristol. Everyone in London was going, oh yeah, good firm. And they even had a few partners go, oh, I wish I had the bravery to make the move, because that would be where I'd go.
And you were underplaying the bravery.
I know,
yeah.
and you're kind of looking at it and going, okay, so they're clearly, and what's transpired, obviously, over the years, sure, we've got fantastic homegrown Southwest, now Edinburgh, and some in London as well, people and partners that have grown and brought up there. But a lot of people have chosen to come to Burges Salmon because they want something that I would say most of our lawyers here could walk into any big London firm. Right? I'm absolutely convinced of the quality of our lawyers. We're really lucky in that respect, but they're not wanting to, and most of the partners don't want to either. So they've come to Burges Salmon because they want to be here, because it is something different, I think, and maybe that does feed back to your point about you can be who you want to be, you can pursue what you want to pursue, you'll get backing, and yet you're still getting, the good quality work and the reputation and they're from a very good law firm.
Ross, so let's go from the you and the career section to the renewable side of the business. We had the brilliant Merlin Carnegie from Low Carbon on the podcast recently, and he declared that Scotland had the potential to be the renewable capital of the world. Thoughts?
Oh, this is a bear trap, isn't it? Yeah. Well, well done for him for promoting Scotland. Big up. I mean, I think I'd probably be a little bit more... I think the UK could probably be viewed as one of the renewable... So that's a loyally answer, isn't it? But the renewable capitals... I mean, the reason I was saying that is I think Scotland's great. I mean, the offshore wind has traditionally started and centred around England and Wales, and it's moved to Scotland. And I think you've got to factor in things like solar. But Scotland is huge, and one of the great successes of Scotland, to be fair to the Scottish government and Scotland generally, is that they have been a real advocate and promoter of renewables since the early days, and they've stuck with it. The policy has stuck with it for a period of time, and that's encouraged investment into Scotland and projects.
And that's not easily done, right?
It's not
universally popular.
And there's been times, let's face it, when Westminster has reneged on various things, and that has sent the odd shockwave through the sector. We've come through that, but that can have temporary periods where it's not great. For example, we've had the onshore wind policy around England, which has stunted growth in that. So I think what Scotland done is great, but I think if you look at deployment, also I think the UK as a centre for renewables. I mean, the amount of businesses that are in the UK around renewables, the amount of entrepreneurial flair there is, the innovators, the developers spread throughout the UK is absolutely incredible. I mean, the Southwest, where I am in Bristol, has been, an absolute hub for innovation on renewable energy from the very beginning. And you've got these pockets all around the country now, and the UK that think renewable energy, that devise solutions. And I would add in consultants as well, because one of my big things in renewable energy is a lot of the focus around policies is all about jobs creation and manufacturing, and how can the UK PLC benefit from renewable energy and provide jobs to all of our children and so forth. And when everyone's thinking about that, often from a politician perspective, it's all about manufacturing plant and components and things like that. And I'm very, very quick to say, I think it's also about us lawyers, us financial advisors, us technical advisors. You know, the consultancy business is bringing in huge amounts for UK PLC based on renewables. We've got over 100 people here advising on day-to-day renewable energy projects. That's 100 people in Burges Salmon doing that.
It's such an important point because the narrative locally, so we've got 11 different properties across the country, and the narrative locally is, oh, we want more gamekeepers, we want more rangers, we want more people, and these are respected roles, but financially entry-level style roles. We're not doing enough of a job, and you've just given me an absolute prompt to better articulate. We want aspirational jobs to come from these. We want jobs that are in themselves being there, having additional jobs knocking on to support those. And we need to elevate that sector as well and more aspirational, because otherwise the real talented people are going to move away for those jobs rather than stay in the communities where they could be. So in a wider consideration of the land, so the production of renewable energy is a huge part of that. One of the things that helps with is our path towards net zero, but also we're living in a biodiversity crisis as well. Do you think there's scope to have renewable energy and conservation side by side?
Absolutely. I'm one of the things I should have said when I introduced myself, I'm also a trustee of various things, but one of them is the Avon Wildlife Trust down here. So I'm a trustee of that, and of course we're heavily looking at this and natural capital and those instruments that can promote it as well. So yes, I think this leads you into debate about whether any use of the land actually affects the biodiversity or could have an effect on the biodiversity. You know, however good it might be. So renewable energy, you know, there will always be the odd negative effect of whatever you do on land. And so, you know, we've got to accept that. But do I think broadly they can live together? Absolutely. And you know, the irony of that is if you don't get renewable energy, or we don't encourage renewable energy, you can be damn sure the biodiversity is going to decrease. So you know, we've got to go with renewable energy, and we've got to find a way of the two working in tandem. But I see it all the time. I mean, in its simplest sense, you see it alongside solar projects and meadows and the land in between solar projects. But there's, you know, the renewables community is very, very alive to this issue. Equally, I think, you know, perhaps when we've come to policy around renewables, we are possibly a bit too risk averse when it comes to habitats and the environment. And I say that as someone who's absolutely committed to environmental protection and so forth. But I think sometimes you've got to move forward and you've got to take a calculated risk to see if something will have an effect, whether it's going to work. And I think the UK in recent years has possibly struggled with that.
I would completely agree. I think we've experienced that. So your team have helped support us with our work with low carbon on pushing forward 2 potential wind schemes in Scotland. That will take a relatively less than 10% of the surface area of the estate we're working with. But in exploring those wind parks, we're going to restore significant areas of peatland. And that is not moving away from the fact we are going to disturb some land to install these wind farms. There are contradictions and compromises in the terms of doing that. But boy, have low carbon tried to find every single way of adding additional sustainability benefits into it. We've even looked at different routes into the site so that we can sequence tree planting. So as one part of the scheme progresses, we'll plant one area. As a decision point, maybe we can plant another. We've even looked at ways of planting, because it's a very sloping site. Can we plant closer in the buffer zone by selecting montane scrub species that can't grow above a certain rate? And they have looked at every possible way of improving habitat as a result of doing that. But it could have been easier. The policy could allow more freedom to do the right thing. These laws and legislations are put in place to try and stop the bad, but sometimes the negative consequences, they also stop the innovation and the good as well, which is such a shame. I think, I'm not sure Merlin's right about Scotland being the renewables capital of the world, but I think it could be the natural capital of the world, certainly, and lead the way forward. And that's why my nervousness around things like land reform in Scotland is that it's scaring away international investors when you've got amazing natural capital potential, including renewable and woodland creation and peatland restoration, and the spectacular global leading thought and thinking jobs that could come from that. You don't want to miss that opportunity because, the West Coast wouldn't have shut down the concept of Silicon Valley because it was worried about who was going to do things. And that's where Scotland could be. It's such a precious, precious place. When did you first notice net zero and the concept of the environment really being spoken about in a meaningful way?
It's a good question. I suppose net zero wise, probably about 8 to 10 years ago. So relatively recently, from a net zero perspective. I mean, I think you could chart environment being taken seriously to many years before that, because the measure I always use about the environment being taken seriously is that there will always be a level of individuals, a level of environmentalists who will take it seriously. My measure of when it's really, when it's really hitting home is when corporates and governments start taking it seriously and adapting their policies and adapting the way they do things. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of corporates and companies out there that are probably still not doing much or not doing enough. But I've seen a marked difference in over the last 10 to 15 years of corporates realizing that actually they've got to do something, not only for the greater good, but also from a business perspective. It makes sense.
Well, we've heard them talk about it so much as recruitment. In terms of getting the greatest and the best talents coming through, is they're now asking at the end of that sort of entry level or internship interview, the young people are saying, what are you doing about climate change? What are you doing about sustainability? And not just a what's your policy? No, talk to me about what you're doing, make that a reality. Are you starting to see that in the firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think the example I would give is, I mean, it's a narrow example, but I think it's quite instructive. So when I first arrived here in the early 2000s, we did something called the first corporate PPA. So this was corporates deciding to go direct to a renewable energy asset and say, we will take the power from you, which is quite complicated because you usually have to sell power through utility and so forth. But there's ways you can do it. And we put a legal construct in place, people like Marks and Spencer and various others. And we thought at the time, right, this is going to be really interesting because this is a way in which corporates can directly buy electricity. And then for about the next decade, I mean, we kept pushing this, saying, this is what you can do. We didn't see too much interest from the corporates. To be fair, we didn't see too much interest from the renewable energy developers who were just busy selling it to the usual off-takers and utilities that we know. And then probably about 10, 15 years ago, suddenly it all went, it all boomed, and everyone and all the corporates were saying, we desperately want green renewable electricity. I mean, there's a market now in these corporate PPAs where the corporates are desperately trying to find assets to contract with to get their renewable energy from. And why am I saying this story? Well, it shows you how things have moved on that. I'm now involved in a new area, which is green hydrogen. And so that's electricity where you could argue that most corporates were a little bit slow to the mark about procuring direct this and getting on board with buying green electricity from source. Green hydrogen now, what you can see amongst all the corporates is, even though the policy towards green hydrogen to promote it is probably only 2 or 3 years old, there's a lot of corporates that are already looking at doing this and getting on board. And they've taken the lesson from what happened with renewable electricity and thought, okay, so for my gases, for my heat, for my raw materials, hydrogen is the replacement for fossil fuel gas. I can see what's going to happen here. And I might have been late to the party with getting renewable electricity, but I'm not going to be late to the party with getting this other fuel source. So you can see that they're much more alive to this and bought into it, even though there's investment needed at this stage.
It's really interesting. No one wants to be first, but literally no one wants to be last.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting around net zero with that. Are there any sort of generally held misconceptions about renewable energy and net zero that you hear regularly?
I'd probably answer that a slightly different way. Probably it's a different question, but I think it is a different question. I think the thing that frustrates me, that I still am amazed.
That's a better question. Yes. What frustrates you?
The thing that frustrates me, that I'm still amazed that we're still in this scenario, is the climate change deniers. I'm very happy to debate and very happy to respect views about the extent to which climate change, and what we do is causing. But I've got no truck with the argument that what we're doing isn't doing it. I mean, we are doing it in some ways. We can argue about the extent, but clearly, to me, it. And when I listen to those and read those articles, and listen to generations who just believe that renewable energy is some sort of mumbo jumbo that doesn't produce any electricity, that is not helping us, bring back coal, fracking, whatever it's going to be, then there's a deal of frustration there. I'm not an evangelist on renewable energy. I recognise that we have to have a transition, and that we're going to need other fossil fuel sources one way or another for a period of time. I get all of that. But the underlying point about the fact that we do need to make a switch and we do need to adapt, that frustrates me.
How
and it's still out there. That's the thing. I mean, 10 years ago you could have said, well, okay, this, I can understand why people still need to work through in their minds. Surely we've got to a stage now where everyone, well, we haven't. But
well, it's how much it's perpetuating in sort of the current. So we're recording this at the beginning of June, 3 weeks out from the general election. You've still got the Tories going, no, we can pull back. We need to make sure that trying to get to net zero doesn't actually cause anyone any discomfort. We want a transition and a change that means staying exactly the same. Right. And it's not addressing any of the big issues that are facing us moving forward.
I think. So I'm not necessarily critical of any of the political parties, because I think they are. I mean, I would applaud the Tories because they brought the net zero target in. Well done to them. There's lots of things I don't agree with, by the way. And equally, if you look at the Labour Party and the policies that are coming forward from the Labour Party, I know everyone can argue about whether they're reneging on various things, but generally across all of our political parties, there is a commitment to decarbonising. You might argue over what date, you might argue over how fast and what we need, so I'm really encouraged by all of that.
That's an interesting point.
I am encouraged because, we're gone as the stark debate about, no renewables versus renewables. We're not in that debate anymore. So that's really encouraging. You mentioned a point there about saying, make it easy for everyone. It's, so it's not uncomfortable for everyone. We have to face, I think, the reality, and I've always believed this, that we've got to switch energy. We're in a new industrial revolution. Hey, guess what? It's going to be uncomfortable for us all. And I get the fact that there are sections of our communities where it will have a disproportionate effect and it will be more uncomfortable because of pricing, fuel poverty and so forth. And we need to absolutely rigorously focus on that and support that area. But anyone who says we can do this without some discomfort, come on. We're all sensible people. It's not going to be a comfortable switch. There will be a level of discomfort, as there would be in anything. We switch to EVs, it's going to be a level of, disruption. Switch to anything, of course there's going to be. When we switch to gas, and there's a level of discomfort. So
I completely agree. We're trying to some people are trying to change stuff set against the context of, oh God, nothing can possibly change, and it's just not realistic or feasible. And there's also needs to be an exception that we've consumed far too much for far too long without consequence. We're in debt with the planet. If you do that from a financial sense, you've got to pay that back at some point. So part of that payback is the discomfort of a transition, I think. And then that's a whole different conversation about how do you best support a just transition. So had an amazing guest, Caddy Thomas, who works with ISEO, the pension advisory firm, and she's from rural Wales. When she was growing up, the sort of Port Talbot steelworks and the challenges around entire communities losing income there is absolutely real. And she was saying how that's, for the natural capital world, that's such a factor in her thinking about how you can avoid that happening, because the realities of entire communities being lost without an industry is not desirable either. So contradictions and compromises.
I think the biggest thing on all of this, though, is if you accept that there's going to be a bit of disruption to people, then if we're going to do that, why don't we capitalise on it so that my kids, your kids, have jobs to go to in years to come? Why don't we embrace it and say,
what is the opportunity this now gives us?
Okay, there's minus and downside, but there's a massive opportunity as well. Let's not let that opportunity slip and just have the downside. Let's go for it.
And I don't think any political party is doing that yet.
Yeah.
I think every political party is going essentially shades of the same thing. The Tories going, don't worry, nothing will change, we'll slow everything down. Apart from the smoking ban, which, bravo, I like that approach from Rishi Sunak. Everywhere else, I think they're following rather than leading. And Labour are just pitching, well, we're not the Tories. And it's largely the same. We had Natalie Bennett, the former leader of the Green Party, on the podcast, who was an incredibly impressive lady. And she was so far out in front. She was probably talking about the government my children will vote for. And that's really exciting about the sort of things they might look at and do. We got more political than I thought we would. So let's go local with this a little bit more. In your work on developing renewables and making it the industry it is today, how have you seen the NIMBYism-based approach, the local resistance to not in my backyard? How was it when you first started with developments, and how is that different today? If it is at all.
So you still definitely get the not in my backyard. And, I've got some sympathy with that because, we're all human. We don't, if you'd ask someone, do you want it right on your doorstep, in most cases, whatever it may be, housing, and most people would go, oh, I'd rather not. I get that. It has changed, and I think it's a generational issue. I think you can still, people can still put proposals forward which are bad proposals in wrong areas, and we mustn't forget that. We want to stop bad projects, bad developments in the wrong locations.
What would make something a bad development?
Well, I don't know whether it's just in the wrong place compared with the amount of electricity you're going to get from it, whether actually it makes no sense whatsoever because of the transport regime, and there's a variety of different factors around that. But the regime's got to be in place to put a check on those bad developments. We still see, and our planning and consenting team are regularly involved in advising on this. I think the public engagement, what the industry does, the renewable industry does in terms of engaging with the public is generally fantastic. I mean, there's much more than there used to be. It's built and baked into the system, perhaps a lot more than it used to be. But again, the renewable energy industry has been very creative about trying to bring communities on board, community engagement. It still doesn't necessarily stop people not wanting the project to go ahead, which is a deep frustration for many developers. So you still see it. I think you will always see a level of those arguments. I think it will dissipate over time, though, because I'm always amazed when I go into schools, when I speak to my kids. They don't even bat an eyelid about renewable energy. They just see it as, well, of course we're going to need this stuff.
One of the people in our team went, I've always liked windmills.
Yeah.
Next conversation. It's like, no one's ever complained about a windmill being there. I think turbines are really pretty. Move on. And I was like, oh yeah, fair enough. That's it.
Well, and also, we mustn't forget that when you have objectors to these, they're very vocal for the very reason they're objecting and they don't want the development to happen. But generally, you find that they are a complete minority. And what what the issue is, which I don't think you're going to solve, is the vast majority that don't mind are not provoked to speak up.
No, exactly. What's your data set you're actually looking
at? And I think that's something. But you do get it. I think it's going to having a community voice and being able to object is a fundamental right, and we've got to be very careful on that. We've got to have right engagement on that. But I see it improving.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever read Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said?
I haven't.
Great book. The data set point was really pertinent there. So he has a wonderful story about one of the first ever infographics, and it's a picture of a Spitfire in World War II. And every time a Spitfire came back, the engineers noted down where there was bullet holes in the wings or tail. And they had like hundreds of these together, and you could see a map, and it showed the main body of the plane, no damage, the wings and the tail covered in bullet holes. And in this scenario, the bullet holes are the NIMBYs, right? So if you respond to the bullet holes, where would you put the extra armour? You put it on the wings and the tail. The mathematician comes in and goes, no, you're only looking at the planes that came back. Where the bullet holes were, they didn't come back, you actually put. And it's the exact same thing about if you're only listening to the loud voices, you're not representing a community or a society, or you can't know that you are. Maybe everybody hates it, but you don't know that if you're only listening to three voices. My final question on this sort of topic area is, has your work changed as a result of Brexit at all? Has it made anything easier, harder, different?
It probably not, other than the whole issue of whether the UK has or has not suffered from a deal perspective and from an economy perspective. Because I think my corporate colleagues will say, the volume of corporate deals down at the moment are, post-pandemic and so forth. But has that got anything to do with Brexit? Can you trace it back? There's less deals than there were, but although that's coming back now. We've managed, fortunately, to maintain a fairly consistent level, but you haven't seen the boom that we've seen in the past. So I can't really point to that as really affecting us. I think it will be interesting in years to come, because Europe, without us, is promoting a lot of instruments around encouraging green hydrogen, renewable electricity, and so forth. The reality is, all of those countries, including us, the UK, we all face issues around how we're going to achieve these developments. Everyone's got grid problems. There's a lot of similarity between the issues and problems and constraints that all countries are going to face in bringing forward more renewable energy and clean power. And we're all going to have to work our way through that.
So we touched on politics briefly a few minutes ago, but we're a few weeks away from the next election. What are your hopes for the next government, whatever colour, size, shape they might be?
I think what the last 15 to 20 years has shown is if you set ambitions and if you set targets and you stick to them, and we were talking about the Scottish Government earlier on and various things like that, if you stick to them and show political support, whenever you're speaking, set the targets, it doesn't take much to convince people that actually we're serious about change, and then that change will follow with developers, companies, individuals capitalising on that and finding a way to actually develop these projects and install them and give companies the confidence to invest in moving to net zero. So I'm actually I think as I said, I'm positive really on all the political parties, well, probably bar the odd one, but that they are committed to net zero. There's an argument over how quickly and how you get there, but I'm not seeing massive differences between that. And I think my hope would be, whichever government gets in, that they restate the commitment to net zero, that they and that they, I'd love to see them grasp the opportunity that the UK has in some areas to capture the jobs and the economic opportunity that we've got on this. We've got a great lead in some technologies, and we've got a great lead in terms of the rest of the world, in terms of what we've installed and various things like that. We ought to be able to capitalise on that. I'm not suggesting, and I'm not stupid enough to realise that, the UK is a small country. We will lose manufacturing to big, jurisdictions and so forth. But I do believe there's a number of jobs. There's a real amount we can capture if we're ambitious.
It is seeing it as an opportunity, I think.
Absolutely.
That's one of my biggest frustrations. People assuming that a transition to a net zero world or a nature-based economy is a cost. It shouldn't be. It should be a profitable opportunity. Yeah. And actually, I think in the last 12 months, the finance sector, the pension funds are seeing that at pace. Every week we get a different announcement of an exciting partnership. So, the Octopus Investment Group have just stepped into the natural capital space. Triodos have announced a partnership with the Canadian Pension Fund, trying to do these things. These are really exciting, innovative companies that are stepping into this space, which is great. I think your hopefulness about the next government, I think we feel some of that too. So we recently met with Kerry McCarthy, the Shadow Secretary of State for Climate Change. Super impressive. Well thought out, well informed. We went for a meeting. You never know with a minister at the level to which you need to pitch the background information or context. We were straight into the technical with fantastic questions, and she was describing how Ed Miliband's sort of environment-focused group within the Labour Party are still exploring certain aspects of what they're doing. And I love that element of humility and openness to working with experts in the sectors and things, and that's really exciting for me. I think there's a huge amount of potential there, and certainly a Labour Party that want to be collaborative on stuff, which you need with all the challenges around renewables and biodiversity, net gain and nature and development and all these things. So that's the hopeful side of stuff. If you and I are sat here again in 5 years' time, what do you think will have changed?
Oh, yeah, it's very difficult to divorce that from what you'd hope. I think, well, from what I'm seeing, I think, just from a UK perspective, I think onshore wind will have opened up to a certain extent back up into England.
We spent quite a bit of time in Europe recently, working with some amazing Belgian and Dutch firms. It's so much more integrated into just life. Yeah. You go along a motorway and it's just dotted with turbines alongside. And they sit in the landscape no different to pylons sitting in our hillsides. And then you come back and their absence is almost jarring. I think there's so much more scope. We could do that. Yeah.
I think you'll see in 5 years' time the first green hydrogen projects.
And what will the application of those be? In terms
they'll be supplying industrials to start with, because it's the easiest and most obvious, and it's the area which has been incentivised by government, possibly more than heat and transport and so forth. But I see that as the initial tranche of the green hydrogen projects to show people they're there, they're working, and then it can extend out into other uses. But I think it will be linked to industrial users to start with, and that's what we're seeing on the ones we're advising on. So you'll see them. I think we will, in 5 years' time, we will hopefully have the announcement from the Celtic Sea tender round for offshore wind in the Celtic Sea, which will be great for Bristol, the southwest, and Wales, which will be fantastic. What else? I think I'd like us, and we're straying back into the like. I think in 5 years' time you will have a lot more companies that the race to become net zero and get greener will still be on with companies, because I think there's a lot of talk when Rishi Sunak signalled what was perceived to be a slight rollback from the net zero targets and agendas. And my thought at the time was, well, that's not ideal. It's not great. It's a bit silly. But the reality is, it isn't going to be you making these decisions. It's going to be, do the corporates think that? And I think we've got to a tipping point with most corporates that they know they're going to have to get there. It's inevitable. That's what they have to do. Again, we can argue over the timing, but they all kind of know it's happening. And if you know it's going to happen, you don't want to be, as you said, the last person doing it. So we have seen a huge amount of interest from corporates looking to decarbonise, looking at setting up their own projects, looking at buying green electricity, green power, looking at hydrogen. And I think that's going to continue apace.
Awesome. Ross, thank you so much for finding the time. It's been a fascinating journey to explore your career. And yeah, the words that just keep ringing in my ears is the bravery, the conviction to follow the thing you were passionate about, and how you've taken those steps to build what is a fascinating career in such an exciting arena. And I'm now increasingly excited about green hydrogen, because you were so right about renewables. I'm sure you're going to be about green hydrogen as well. But thank you so much for finding the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for calling me brave. That's the first time. That's good. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.